Hello everybody. I'm a little sick today, so I sound kind of terrible, but today I wanted to talk about alocasias because I recently acquired a few and I really started to like them a lot, so I just wanted to talk about them, and I feel like a lot of people have some struggles with them, but I haven't really had any issues so far. So I wanted to talk about them, and I have a few cool notes about the history of these specific alocasias that I have. So I wanted to share that too. So first one that we have, this is a pretty common one, and this is the first one that I got. This is Alocasia amazonica. I'm pretty sure this is Alocasia amazonica. It honestly doesn't really look quite like Alocasia amazonica. It has those striking veination in the middle, but it doesn't have it around the edge, which I usually see in these plants. Given this is a juvenile plant, maybe that's just because it's young, but this is amazonica, and I have a couple of notes about it. It does have other names such as Polly and African mask, but the original name is amazonica. It was developed in the 1950s in a Florida nursery by a man named Salvador Mauro, and he owned a nursery there that it's gone now. But he was one of the first people, or maybe someone else in his nursery, hybridized this plant. It's a mix between Alocasia watsoniana and sanderiana. So if you look up those plants on the internet, this is the hybrid between the two. It's not a species, you will not find it in the wild, but it is a hybrid between the two, and it's very interesting. It's been around since the 50s, so for about 60 years, and there's, smaller forms now. There's the Alocasia Bambino, which is the tiny version of this, and it's pretty neat. Okay. This is Alocasia lauterbachkiana. This is a very interesting alocasia. This is a juvenile form. They do get much larger than this, but with every leaf they'll start to get larger and larger. They've got these beautiful, like, serrated sword-shaped leaves, and these are interesting because they are not a hybrid. They are actually a species you can find in the wild. They were discovered in the 1800s, late 1800s, 1899, by Heinrich Gusta, and originally they were classified under the genus Schizocasia, which is interesting. I'm not sure if that genus is still around, but they were classified under Schizocasia by this man, and for a while they accepted that until about 1968 it was added to the genus Xenophia, and that's still accepted for this plant. However, it is most commonly referred to the genus Alocasia, which is really interesting. I think the leaf shape just kind of threw them off, honestly, because it's such a unique shape. They do have beautiful flowers, very similar to every Alocasia ever, so most commonly people refer to these plants under the genus Alocasia. Also, another name that you can call them is Alocasia baroque sword or purple sword. So they do have a couple different names. It's really interesting. This plant is called Alocasia Imperial Red. I've heard that it is also a hybrid. I really couldn't find a lot of information on it online, so unfortunately I really don't have any information on it, but I think it might be a cross between probably an odora and something else, just, the regular large elephant ear plant. But it's quite striking. It's got these beautiful red stems, and it will grow to be quite large, so I'm expecting it to be the size of an odora one day, or a Regal shield. Alright, my last plant is a very large one. This is my This is my Alocasia Regal Shield. This is one of my favorite plants that I have. It's actually my newest plant, and I got it from Pueblo Life here in Phoenix. I only got it for $45, which is pretty awesome because it has some damage on its leaves. Otherwise, it's completely fine. It was just from shipping. One of its leaf was cut off, and I just kind of found it in like the sale section of their, greenhouse, and I was like, oh my goodness, this plant looks completely fine, and it's so cheap for, a boutique plant shop. I was half expecting it to be, $75, $80, but it was marked down quite a bit. So I was super happy to find it. I've only really found like really tiny Regal shields in my area, so I was really happy to see a very large one. So Alocasia Regal Shield is also a hybrid. It's a hybrid between the Black Velvet Alocasia, the little jewel Black Velvet one, and an Alocasia Adora. It's actually a brand new, well, relatively new hybrid. It's been around since 2013, which is pretty crazy, given how popular it is now. And it was developed by a woman named Larry Ann Garner in 2013, and she just hybridized these two, the Black Velvet and the Odora, and she got this beautiful Regal Shield plant. And these are wonderful because they've got these green, they come out very velvety, and then they kind of fade to not very velvety, but they come out just absolutely beautiful, and then undersides are kind of like this purple color. They are stunning. I'm gonna put this down. The person at the store told me that the Alocasia Regal Shield is one of the easier Alocasias that you can get. They kind of require the same thing, really bright light, fast draining soil. The soil that they have it in is like this very kind of wood chippy, chunky soil. It's not very, it doesn't have a lot of peat in it, maybe a little bit, but Alocasias really like to be root bound. Not, like super root bound, but in general, pretty, tight feet, I suppose. So you can let them go for quite a while. They don't mind being kind of tight in the pot there. Actually, they prefer it, so I would not repot your Alocasia for, very long. But those are my Alocasias. I will do a quick, just kind of rundown of everything. As far as light goes, again, I use a grow light. I also have south-facing windows, so they get a lot of natural indirect light throughout the day. Some of them do get like dappled direct light for maybe an hour or two. They don't mind, it doesn't burn. But yeah, in general, just no direct light, prolonged direct light for these plants. Okay, so that's light. As far as watering goes, water when half the soil is dry or so. I can't really give you, it depends on the type of pot that you have and the type of soil that you have, so I can't really give you a time period. I really don't keep track of how often I water these plants. It's really just, whenever the soil is half dry. And if that's a week, if that's 2 weeks, then so be it. I really don't keep track. I just kind of look at the plant and I say, is this plant trying to tell me that it's thirsty? Is it kind of dripping a little bit? Is the soil half dry? Then I water it. As far as the type of water goes, I just use tap water. I know some people like to use, distilled water, filtered water, whatever works for you. If you have really bad tap water, then I would recommend using, filtered water. from your Brita or, you know, from your fridge or something. But if you don't have, you know, bad tap water, then you can just use regular tap water. And I know a lot of people, they will take their Alocasia or any of their plants, if they do use tap water, and they will, every, you know, couple of weeks or so, they will do a really good flush out. Make sure that all the minerals, all of the, you know, stuff that's in the tap water is flushed out of the plant, as well as extra chemicals from fertilizer or whatever you put in there. So that's a good idea, something that you can do every couple of weeks or so. That's what I do. But whenever I water these guys, I will just kind of water them until the water is, you know, draining out the bottom, and I'll just do that until I feel like all of the soil is saturated. Also, a good way that you can tell with any plant whatsoever is if the pot feels lighter than usual. This one feels pretty heavy because I just watered this one, whereas this one feels significantly lighter because it's time to water. Okay, so that's water. As far as fertilizer goes, again, whenever your plant is actively growing, you can fertilize it. You know, here in the desert, it never really gets below like 30 degrees, 35 degrees. So I don't really worry too much about these plants going dormant. So I kind of lightly fertilize them during the winter, and then during the summer you can, you know, pick up the fertilizer more often. I'll show you the fertilizer that I do use though. This is the one that I use most often, and I add about half, maybe less than half a capful to my watering can, and then I water, and all my plants, you know, they seem to enjoy it. So that's one fertilizer that I've been trying out. I was using Super Thrive for a while, and I have to say, this stuff is really good. It smells really bad, but I do enjoy this quite a bit. And you just add a little bit. I use maybe like a couple drops of this in my watering can, and it helps with plants that are maybe in shock, not having a good time. So I just I use this on every plant that I bring home, every plant that comes to me, you know, through shipping or whatever. I water that plant with a little bit of this, and it just kind of helps reduce any sort of shock that the plant is going through. And it also just has a lot of good vitamins for the plant in it. But yeah, these are pretty good, you know, very mild fertilizers. This is all that I use for now. I do have Miracle Grow, like just regular, you know, like granule fertilizer that I put in water, but I'm generally looking for like a stronger fertilizer to use when the spring comes around, which is soon. So if you have any recommendations, drop it below. I was using, what's it called? Liquid Dirt for a little bit, and I don't think I used it long enough to like see a difference, but I did like it. Anyway, so that's fertilization. As far as soil goes, I use Fox Farms Ocean Forest soil for most of my plants. I literally don't add anything to it because I've noticed that it dries out really nicely, but it also retains moisture really well because it has sphagnum moss in it. It also just has some random like leaf litter in it as well, and has a good amount of perlite. For my cacti and like my succulents, I do add a little bit more of the perlite and like sand into it, but for the rest of my plants, I really don't add anything. For my Hoyas, I do add more like orchid bark to it because they're epiphytes, or most Hoyas are epiphytes and prefer a more chunky mix. But for my philodendrons, for my, you know, monsteras, I don't add anything. So that's Ocean Forest by Fox Farms, and it comes, I got it online off of this one seller. I don't recommend getting it on Amazon because they will overcharge you quite a bit. But I do recommend just going online, finding some sort of online like general plant store, and seeing what kind of best deals you can get for it. But it comes in quite a large bag. I still have it and I love it. Like, great soil. Dries out really nicely. I don't have to worry about root rot whatsoever with this. I can put any plant in a plastic pot and it will dry out like super well. I don't know what they put in that soil, but it works really well for me. So as far as pH goes, most alocasias like a pH in the soil from like 5.5 to 6.5. And you can test your alocasia's soil pH with, there's like a pH reader that you can find on Amazon. And if you need to raise or lower it, one way to raise it is to add limestone. You can get agricultural or horticultural limestone, I'm pretty sure, at any store like Home Depot or Lowe's. To lower your pH in your soil, you can add aluminum sulfate or sulfur into the soil. I'm sure there's some other ways you can do it, but when I looked it up, that's one way that you can do it. And I believe you can also buy that at any sort of like garden store or whatever. So I would definitely check your soil pH. That is, as far as pH goes, it helps the plant absorb nutrients better, and it will help the plant grow better. So that's one thing that I find people overlook in the houseplant community is pH. So I would definitely check on that. I'm guilty of it too. I just found out about it and I just started, you know, getting into it. So check your soil pH for your plants. If your plant's not growing the way you wanted it to, you know, you have to check all different kinds of things that could, you know, factor into that growth rate. So Alocasia is 5.5 to 6.5. Again, raising soil pH, you can add limestone, and decreasing sulfur or aluminum sulfate. So that's pH. What else is there? Propagation. I don't know a whole lot about Alocasia propagation, to be honest. I know that alocasias, when they get, you know, this large, you know, my huge Regal shield, they will start to put out little bulbs in the soil. So you can dig it up. They'll also put out just kind of runners that you can propagate that way. I did watch somebody propagate their Alocasia by just like taking one of those runners, cutting the stem, and then eventually it will grow into a full plant. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can propagate alocasias, but one thing to note is that they don't propagate through nodes because they don't have nodes. I mean, they do eventually, but you know, this size, they don't. Large Alocasia odoras, they do eventually get like this trunk kind of thing that you can cut, and then nodes will develop and they'll start to root. But most alocasias, like the jewel alocasias, these guys will not get to that way. So it'll take a long time. Eventually they'll get kind of that trunk looking thing, but the best way to propagate these guys is by division, or just kind of, you know, digging up a bulb. So troubleshooting with these guys, I think some of the main problems that people have with alocasias is the leaf dropping or the leaf drooping, and kind of the yellowing or like burning edges. If your alocasia is getting kind of like a yellowing, kind of on this leaf, you can kind of see that. This plant I did overwater at one point, so it can be from overwatering or underwatering. Some leaves will also start to get brown at the tips. That can also be from overwatering. Alocasias will also start to get brown or yellow if they don't get enough light. So one way to solve that is to move it to a brighter spot and then, you know, water it just a little bit less. Again, a good rule is to just stick your finger in, see if it's half dry, and go about watering your plant. Another thing that can go into, you know, having issues with alocasias is humidity. They do like humidity. They are not meant to be in dry climates, dry, cold climates. They will go into dormancy, which goes back to my propagation thing. If your alocasia goes dormant, do not fear, because if you dig it up, most likely you can save the bulb and then replant it, and you'll have just like a pot of dirt for most of the year, but eventually it will regrow and you'll just have your plant again. But alocasias won't go dormant unless they are triggered to, which means, you know, the air in your house gets really dry, it gets really cold for a long period of time. You know, if it's just one day, it won't matter, but if your house gets really cold for a long period of time, your alocasia will go dormant. And if it gets really dry, it will also not be happy as well. So alocasias will not go dormant if you keep it kind of, you know, relatively the same climate all year round. So just keep that in mind. I think that's about it, really. I think I've talked a lot about alocasias today. So if you have any other questions, let me know. I think this will be my new setup for now. I have like my paintings over here, and then I have my little plants over here. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any other questions about alocasias, I'm by no means an expert, but I do keep them alive and they're pretty healthy. So drop any questions you have below, and yeah, thank you for watching.